have you been coming to work, trying so hard to focus, trying so hard to work hard, only to find it increasingly difficult? You're not lazy, but you might be on a path towards burnout. It happens to the most successful people, and I want to talk to you today about the 9 stages that take you into burnout and how to start spotting them early so that you can get off this toxic path. I'm Cecilia. As a leadership and career coach, I've worked with countless professionals to teach them how to become more confident, find their voice, and speak up for themselves. I help them build healthy, positive work environments for themselves and for others. If you're looking for more confidence, if you're looking for more well-being and authenticity in your work, stick around. That's what I talk about. We should start taking burnout a lot more seriously than we are. I hear people throwing around the term burnout for feeling high stress or ongoing stress. And although that can lead to burnout, stress and burnout are actually a little bit different. This is how WebMD describes burnout. Burnout can be caused by stress, but it's not the same. Stress results from too much mental and physical pressure and too many demands on your time and energy. Burnout is about too little emotion, motivation, or care. Stress can make you feel overwhelmed, but burnout makes you feel depleted and used up. The typical signs of full-blown burnout are exhaustion, detachment, and a complete breakdown or shutdown of the system. There are a lot of medical conditions that are attached to burnout as well. Things like high blood pressure, an increased risk for diabetes 2, full-blown insomnia, which is a medical condition, and gut and stomach issues. I've worked with professionals who are coming out of burnout, and let me tell you, it takes years to recover from fully. Burnout can feel a little bit sneaky because we're not seeing full diagnoses for it yet. It can masquerade as what looks like laziness or depression. So let's get into the real 9 stages of burnout and see where you're at. Stage 1, overdrive. This is where burnout often starts, where you're finding yourself in a work circumstance or a new role where you're just not equipped to do the job. Maybe you haven't been trained properly. Maybe it's a new task for you or a new team, and you're feeling like you're just not good enough. Often that's a stage of stretching for us, but you might be finding yourself in this overwhelming need to prove yourself. You start to overwork to the point of perfection. You start to work longer hours. You start to be more intense about your work. And this need is constantly driven by this fear that you're just not doing enough or you're just not enough. This might also be paired with a fear of losing your role. Now, don't get me wrong, working hard isn't necessarily a problem. If you're working hard from a space of inspiration, motivation, that's really great, and that can be quite healthy. However, if you're working from a space of fear and it's driven by the sense of fear, it leads into stage 2, which is self-sacrifice. You're working so hard and so many hours that you start to neglect your personal needs. It might start with missing breaks. It might start with working overtime. It might start with not eating enough food or good food. And then it can devolve into things like working really late at night when you don't need to. An interesting part of this stage, especially when it starts to lead to deeper burnout, is that you start to feel kind of proud of yourself that you're able to sacrifice that much. And of course, as a professional, there's going to be times, projects, and emergencies where you do need to be able to push yourself to that limit. Another sign of this stage is that you might start to judge others for taking care of themselves. You might look at someone who leaves on time or doesn't work on weekends and judge them a little bit. This might be a sign, especially if that is not truly who you have been in the past. These 2 stages together, the constant working and then the added part of self-sacrifice, then leads you into stage 3, which is disorientation. At this stage, things start to get a bit out of control and there start to be external signs that you're not being yourself. You're becoming overwhelmed, overworked, and have a general feeling of disorientation. You might start to become more forgetful than normal, or starting to make mistakes that are silly and small and not like yourself. Those mistakes feel really horrible, especially when you're still in that mind frame of perfection and of not being enough. It starts to play into the script in your mind that you are not good enough and you might lose your role. And that leads to the next stage. Stage 4, emotional erosion. This is where you've had stress or low-grade stress for so long, that feeling of overwhelm that emotionally you just started to get done. You might start to see yourself having a loss of empathy towards your colleagues, starting to feel maybe resentful towards colleagues, especially if that's not who you normally are. You might find yourself bitter when people are laughing at work, or maybe when people are talking about their personal life and having this exciting life. This might also lead to increased conflict with others. Things that maybe hadn't been an issue in the past, you're now starting to become a little bit more abrasive with. You're starting to be a little less careful with people's emotions. Because of that emotional erosion, you have no space or energy left to sort of care about others because you haven't cared about yourself. Your bucket is empty and there's just nothing left to give. This might also start spilling over into your personal life, where you're starting not to care as much about spending time with your friends. Maybe time with family doesn't feel as important, or you're not able to be as present with your family, so it starts to feel less satisfying and meaningful. And this is where we're starting to get to slightly more serious signs of burnout. If you don't catch it now, it can really de-escalate and spiral into something so much more serious. Let's talk about the next stage. This emotional erosion starts to lead into stage 5, which is high cynicism. You might start to sneer at those around you. You might start to look at your work like it's meaningless and silly. You might start to be really cynical about your team, your leadership. You might start to see yourself as being kind of useless. Now, don't get me wrong. Our corporate environment can be so hard for this. We're put on projects or work that might be meaningful, but that come with really high administrative overhead. And so you find yourself emailing about the work you need to do, going to meetings talking about the work you need to do, over communicating about work without actually doing the work. And that can lead into so much frustration because really you're not using your experience, your education to the highest level that you can. Now you're using that beautiful brain of yours to do some really menial administrative tasks. Some of my clients tell me about this experience of only able to actually work on the work they've been talking about all day in the evenings after everybody's asleep, because during the day so much of it is spent on what they find are these useless tasks. Regardless, this high cynicism starts to pull you away from feeling like you're have any meaning left at work. You forget what the point of it all is. Your effort seems pointless and you just feel completely useless. Some signs in this too are if you're starting to hear someone speaking positively at work, about work, or in your personal life, you hear someone talking about work in a way that they love, you have a really cynical, negative reaction to that. If that's not really like you previously, that's a really good sign that you're now spiraling into one of the mid stages that lead to full-blown burnout. Stage 6, apathy and withdrawal. This stage is talked about a lot in burnout, but it's really important to note. We've gone through overwork, high stress. We've talked about not feeling good about yourself and fear. At this point, that emotional erosion, that feeling of just not good enough, and also that cynicism you've been experiencing starts to lead into the most natural next stage, which is apathy and withdrawal. Because we can only sustain those negative emotions for so long in our body before it just gets to be too much. In this stage of apathy and withdrawal, you see yourself as just this vessel that's doing menial tasks all day. You feel completely disconnected from your body. You feel disconnected from people. It might start to feel like a really bad dream that you're in. This is especially one of those stages where people start to look at you and you might start questioning yourself, saying, am I lazy? What's happening to me? This isn't like me, but I just don't care. No matter how much I try and how much effort and energy I come into work with, I just can't get that much done. This can happen earlier on as well, but in this 6th stage, it's very, very prominent. And this leads to stage 7, which is identity erosion. You start to lose a sense of who you really are. This detachment and withdrawal starts to feel like a really bad dream, and you feel like you can't even tell what is real, what isn't real. Life starts to feel gray, meaningless. You see yourself as this machine that's constantly completing pointless tasks. You're just this vessel going through the motions. You might have even forgotten what joy and happiness feels like. And this is where you really start to deviate even more from the behavior that you would normally do. This is also where we start seeing some real serious signs of burnout. Things like physical and mental exhaustion, but not being able to rest, or where rest, vacations, weekends, do nothing to replenish your energy. When you come to work, you will find yourself right back to where you were feeling before. You might also start to experience that exhaustion, but an inability to sleep, that tired and wired feeling where you're now going into serious insomnia. And that insomnia really exasperates this entire cycle. As you can tell, we're getting serious here. Stage 8, we get into full-on hopelessness. The feelings of despair, hating your work, hating your life, or hating yourself, and even thoughts of self-harm. We're so detached now from any type of meaningful activities or meaning in our lives that it just doesn't seem to make a point anymore. And that leads to stage 9, which is the full breakdown, a full mental and physical collapse. You might also find yourself feeling sick more often, getting injured more often. There's a way our body almost starts to pull away and try to show us the signs before we sometimes catch on mentally as to what's actually happening. Now, this is really hard. When I've gone through some of these stages, it can feel so hopeless, and you can feel like you're so down a dark path that you don't know if there's a possibility to come out of it. It feels like any job would feel this way. You might also start to think that work is supposed to feel this way. One of the best things you can start to do is early on, see if you can move away from fear and work with someone or for yourself to get into that motivation and inspiration stage about work. Find meaning in what it is that you do. If you don't find your work in general meaningful, see if you can find tasks or skills that you use meaningful and fulfilling, and do those more often. Focusing on work that feels slightly more fulfilling or meaningful can have a real big pattern interrupt into that cycle that can devolve so quickly. Once you've recognized some of the signs of burnout, the next thing you need to do is start setting quick, small boundaries. And I mean 10-second boundaries. Some of these boundaries have been complete game changers for my clients. I talk about them in this next video.